Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Monday, the 13th of May. As we work our way through the letter of James with McShane, we read chapter 5 today, which begins quite challengingly. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. And he goes on a very challenging passage to the wealthy. Now, we can all sit and say, I'm not the wealthy. Those people with their 5 cars, 3 houses, and overseas holidays, they're the wealthy, not me. We need to look the other way and say, me with my 1 car and my 1 house and 3 meals a day, as opposed to those many, many, many people who have so much less than me. I am wealthy. And so it's a real challenge to Christians. How do we deal with our wealth, and how do we deal with people we employ and the payments we need to make? And is it just? Because he continues a little later in verse 4, look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. And so here James is writing to wealthy people who were having folk work for them and not paying them. And that does happen. Back in the 80s, there was a minister who was involved in work in the townships. And one of the township church members came to him and said, I can't come out on the amount of money that I'm being paid for my domestic work. So the minister went to the employer, and who was also a member of the church, but in the suburbs, and said, your employees can't come out on that amount of money. And that amount of money back in those days was, even then, it was very little, quite unjust. And their response was, well, if they don't want to work for that much, there are many other people that do. Can pass the job on. And I thought, there was somebody, and there were wages that were crying out against that employer. And so we need to ask ourselves, are we just in our payments? And some of us might not be employing others, but in all that we do we live generously? The car guards, and I recognize I'm not too keen on car guards, but in a country where there is no employment, and people are doing the little they can to try and make something. If I just give them 2 rand after sort of watching over the car for an hour or 2, is that just the extra 10 rand in my pocket? Is that not going to be crying out against me in the ears of God? And so we need to be looking at all of those things and saying, how do we live justly and generously? And as we head for an election, it's particularly an issue in this country where wealth and poverty are so prevalent. We have the highest Gini coefficient in the world, the gap between the rich and the poor. And we can't sit back and say, I'm not a tenderpreneur. I haven't made millions out of my connections to the governing party. Those people have to answer for themselves. The governing party will have to answer for itself. And as we come to an election, we need to look at how are those people going to manage wealth? Are they going to hold back wages, give it to the wealthy, or are they going to deal justly with the poor in society? And we're reminded it's not just pointing fingers at them, but looking at ourselves as well and saying, how do we live? So be challenged. Let God's word speak challengingly to us. Let us stop and say, Lord, guide me that I may live rightly for your glory. Be blessed.